Greetings and salutations, true believers. So hey, Aaron from the editing bay here. You may recall that we had our first episode, which was a longin, on Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons's Watchmen. We left off that episode with kind of the overall recap of where comics were at the time, how the industry started, and yada yada yada. And as this episode begins, we are picking up midstream in Johnny's recap of the plot of Watchmen. So strap in, because here we go.
You got the setup and the initial mystery. Rorschach, he develops his mask killer theory, sets out to warn and or recruit the four remaining superheroes. Through flashbacks, we sort of learn more about who Edward Blake was, the comedian, his role in as a U.S. government agent, as a superhero, and kind of what he means to everybody else in the sort of group, the Crime Busters, as we're called in the comics. Not the Watchmen. Thank you, Zack Snyder, you fucking dick.
Did he change that in the movie?
Yeah, he called the superhero group the Watchmen, which completely removes any semblance of symbolism that Alan Moore was trying to put forward in calling the book Watchmen, but not the superheroes Watchmen. Yeah, there's a lot of graffiti in the background. It says, "Who watches the Watchmen?" That's one of the main themes, which basically, it comes from Latin, but essentially means who cops the cops, who polices the police, who actually, if these are the guys in charge, well, who's in charge of them? You know what I mean? Recently, I'm sure a lot of people have watched the Amazon series. I think it's Amazon, The Boys. I haven't watched
I was just going to say, this is exactly what that sounds like. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The Boys kind of have taken this concept that's in Watchmen, and as a TV series, they're kind of like furthering the story. I had the original series. It started, of course, as a comic book. And I had the first few issues, and I thought this is too macho bullshit. So
that's my read on that creator mostly. So
I forget who did it. Is that Garth Ennis?
I think it's Garth Ennis.
I think it is too.
Yeah,
and that's a lot. Who's also English. There's something about English comic books who really they just want to be edgy all the time.
Yeah,
and this was definitely Alan Moore at his edgiest, but he at least had something to say. Okay. Another really big thing that we learn in the first act of the book is that the U.S. won the war in Vietnam because they hired essentially Dr. Manhattan, sent him overseas to kill some Kongs, kill the Viet Cong, blow them up. A lot of explosions. He and comedian Eddie Blake are the two guys really from the Crime Busters who go overseas and fuck shit up. Because of this, Richard Nixon, is still the president of the United States. In the HBO miniseries, it's also mentioned, it's pointed out that Vietnam is annexed and has become the 51st state. They took it a step further in the HBO series, but I'm not really going to talk about the TV series or the movie too much. But anyway, suffice to say, Nixon is still the president. Vietnam is fucked. No communists there. So it's a good time for everybody. And of course, we're talking 1986, so it's deep in the cold. Okay. Dr. Manhattan is doing all this kind of cool shit with technology. So we have electric cars far sooner than we see them today because he can synthesize what's it called? Lithium, right?
Yeah.
Out of thin air. He's what's that thing called? an alchemist, right?
Yeah.
He can just, he can manipulate atoms, and so there's all this crazy new technology. Another but big significant kind of big deal thing happens, and Laurie and Dr. Manhattan, they break up because as Manhattan is going through it as his kind of like godlike, he's becoming more and more godlike and less of a human, and he just can't relate to Laurie. So they break up. She runs off and essentially moves in with Dan. Ooh, soap opera. Ooh. All right. Okay. So that's
personal drama.
Intersexual course.
Yeah.
I don't know. But that's kind of so that's like the setup there. That's act one. Is everybody kind of following along so far? Yeah. Okay. So now we get into act two, the plot thickener, right?
The roux of the plot.
The roux of the plot, exactly. You need the flour, you need the cheese, you got to melt it with the butter. It's going to be good. Mm-hmm. You put it on the macaroni.
You put it on the macaroni.
In this case, the flour is Vietnam, and the butter is Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
That's bad. It's bad. It gets bad, or US versus USSR. Let's see what happens, right? So Dr. Manhattan is grilled on live television about previous associates with him who all seemingly happen to have cancer. So he exiles himself, Dr. Manhattan, that is, to Mars, because he just can't handle fucking people. He is no longer a people. So he's like, fuck this, I'm going to move to Mars.
Bye.
And that's where he reflects upon his past, his present, and his future all at the same time, which again, as a little Christian boy at the time of my first reading of this, was too much for me to handle. I just couldn't conceive of like, wait a minute, this guy can just view time as a piece of paper, which kind of plays into the comic book thing, but because you can read the time of the comic book any way you want. You can skip to the end, you can go back and forward and stay on the same page, and you kind of get all the information. And then, okay, plot-wise, however, Rorschach, he's still going around. He's playing detective. He's beating up dudes in bars. He's breaking some fingers. And he's trying to find out who the fuck killed Edward Blake. Because he discovers that Blake learned something that he should not have learned, but we don't know what. So we're kind of getting a little further as to why at least Blake was killed, but not the who. And also still unsure of who may be next, right? Well, it turns out the person next is Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, because there is an assassination attempt that occurs at in the lobby of Adrian's big office building tower thing in the
Trump
downtown. Yeah. His little Trump tower. So he's downstairs with his secretary. The secretary gets shot instead, and as he proceeds to question the would-be assassin bites on a cyanide pill and dies. Okay. Then Rorschach, through all of his scheming and running about, is eventually apprehended by the police. His mask is pulled off. And guess what? It's the guy from the first page with the sign that says the end is nigh. This been the homeless guy the whole time. When I read that the first time, blew my fucking mind, and that's the brilliancy of comic books. You don't hear the characters. You don't hear what they sound like. So when his mask gets pulled off, which by the way, he calls his face, bit of parasocial kind of thing going on there. You didn't know that it was this guy that you've actually seen a lot of like little scenes with him this entire time. So it fucked me up. It was great. So yeah, Rorschach is apprehended. He gets thrown in jail. His name is Walter Coe. And that's the end of Act 2. Following along so far? We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Act 3 is the sudden downward spiral. This is where the pacing really starts to pick up. Dan and Laurie, going back to them now, they decide to engage in some illegal superhero stuff. They're like, fuck it, let's put the costumes back on. I'm going to hop in my magic. It's not magic, but, it's the high-tech.
The owl ship.
Owl ship. That's like a big orb that he calls Artemis, I think. Is it Artemis?
No, it was Archimedes.
Archimedes, right. And they fly up. They go into New York City. There's a tenement fire. And so they rescue everyone from the tenement fire and put them on an adjacent building. And this gets them so worked up that they fuck. Okay. It's actually explicitly
They go
pointed out. They just go right the fuck at it. It's pointed out that Dan can't get it up without being a superhero. There's impotency
It's an
involved.
important detail for sure. Yeah.
Actually, yeah, it's a very important detail.
And this is when the lyrics for Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah appear in the frame, right? Because that's what the song is about. It was a great choice.
Wait, is that in the movie?
That's in the movie.
No fucking way.
Wait, what?
No.
Yeah, it is.
Hallelujah plays when they bang?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I thought you were joking.
No.
I haven't seen that
Aaron,
movie.
I wish I was.
Is it the original Leonard Cohen version or the Jeff Buckley? It's got to be the Jeff Buckley.
I think it's
sure.
the Jeff Buckley.
Of course,
but
yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
Either way, that's terrible. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Wow.
The only thing I like about, not sorry to derail for a bit. I think the only effective thing in the Zack Snyder movie is it is the only good use of Billy Crudup in a movie as casting him as he's the guy who plays Osterman in Manhattan, because he is casting him as a disassociated, apathetic, weird man is the only good use of Billy Crudup.
Sure, I guess that's the only thing I've seen him in. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean he's in Big Fish too.
Oh right.
And like everything he does aside from the last
I have that on tape.
Scenes, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Aside from the last few scenes, he's just like off. And there's some interview where he's talking about like, yeah, I try to find the weirdest line reading for everything that I meant. It's like, but why? But why, Billy? Anyway.
Well, it is a Tim
Burton.
Thank you.
Yep.
Film. So yeah.
I like that movie a lot.
It is great. It's probably Burton's last good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I have it on tape, like I said.
Great fucking movie, though.
It's a great movie. It's a great movie. Okay. So yeah, Dan and Lori, they do illegal superhero shit. Excuse me. They bang on the ship, and immediately, when you finish having sex for the first time with somebody, you usually there's some pillow talk and blah blah blah. No, what Dan says is, let's break Rorschach out of prison. So not the most gentle.
Going back into the whole like that's this
the
whole
only
superhero thing is the only thing that makes him feel like a man.
Like a man, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, so they decide to break Rorschach out of prison, and then they do. Rorschach is broken out of prison. Dr. Manhattan suddenly reappears from Mars, and he's like, hey, Lori, come back with me to Mars. And so Dan and Rorschach, they're like, okay, fuck, we used to be partners. Let's do it again. They get the hell out of New York. Okay.
This is after Rorschach appears in Dan's apartment to just eat his beans, right?
This is long after that. Yeah. There's a great scene with that. And it's like, Dan's like, you sure you don't want me to heat those up? Rorschach's like, cold's fine. Like, just eating cold beans, stealing sugar cubes. That guy's a fucking lunatic. Anyway, so okay. Prison break. Dan brings Rorschach back to his house, which the police have already come and kind of asked him about. Hey, do you know anything about this Rorschach guy? And Dan's like, no. So they avoid capture by the police. Lori and Dr. Manhattan they fuck off to Mars. And it's on Mars that Dan and Lori have a very kind of serious discussion on the fate of humanity. And, Dr. Manhattan's like, well, who gives a shit? And Lori's like, well, I kind of fucking do, because I'm a human and you're not anymore. And it's through this talking and this back and forth because, the other big thing, of course, is now that Dr. Manhattan has fucked off to Mars, the USSR is getting kind of antsy with the nuclear launch button there. They're saying
part of the thing was Manhattan was being used as a nuclear deterrent. I mean, he killed the commies in Vietnam. What's stopping him from doing it to the Soviets, right? And so now that he's gone, it's never directly stated because we don't see the USSR actually make any kind of statement of this. Yeah. The thing that happens is they invade Afghanistan instead of anything else. And so there's like, everyone's twitchy, like shit. Soviets are in Afghanistan. They're probably going to nuke us. We should try to nuke them first. Mutual destruction. So, mutually assured destruction.
So yeah, so that's what's happening. And Lori, Dr. Manhattan button heads. And it's during this that Lori somehow comes to the conclusion, realizes that Eddie Blake, the comedian, is her dad. So this fucks her up even more than anything else that's going on. I mean, he's like the worst dude. The comedian had also, he assaulted sexually Lori's mom at one point. And so it's then revealed, like, wait a minute, he actually went back and Lori's mom consented to sleeping with Eddie. And that's where Lori comes from. So there's all these fucked up emotions like, wait, your would-be rapist is, you just let him into your house and into your body. And that's where I come from. What the fuck is going on? So it's all this tension. It's just tension. This is where all the tension happens. And then that's where we end with Act 3 and we get into Act 4. We good? Yep. Following along? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. That was.
Yeah. Well, I have a comment about like Dr. Manhattan's like change of heart, but I wonder if you're gonna get into it like
no, by all means.
Why does that revelation of her finding out about her true father suddenly make him care about humanity and like want to save?
That's a great question. So what Manhattan comes to the conclusion is that life, the simple act of procreation itself and creating life through that act is essentially magical. There are so many factors involved in not allowing that to happen. Everything from maybe the sperm doesn't reach the egg and die.
So much can go wrong.
Infertility. There's so much that can go wrong that it is in fact like it is miraculous that people are able to have children and create life and sustain life the way that it is. And so he's like, you know what, Lori, you've convinced me, even though you're having this extremely traumatic episode where you discovered that your mom's would-be rapist is your dad. Let's bring you back to Earth. You're right. I'm not gonna fuck off and fix things. Also, there is an element too of curiosity with Dr. Manhattan, because as he's been reflecting on Mars, on not only his past but his future, he can't see beyond a certain point. It's all static to him. And it's after the static occurs after his argument and conversation with Lori. So another big part of it is he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. So he wants to see, because up to this point, that's never happened to him before. He knows exactly what's going to happen to him every second as it's occurring. Right.
Okay.
So yeah, he's like, let's see what's going on. So yeah, so it's kind of a double element there. So she argues for humanity. He agrees. And he's also just plain curious because he's a scientist, right? So, any other questions so far? I want to slow down a bit. No, for that? Okay, cool. Okay. Act 4, I called The End of the World as We Know It.
You feel fine? Okay.
Not really. Not in this book. Okay. I left that line out on purpose.
Okay.
So yeah. So
we do not feel fine.
We do not feel fine.
REM is full of shit, man.
Yep. So the final act of the book begins with Nixon with the nuclear football.
That's the end of the world in real life begins with Richard Nixon.
Yes, exactly. It's very apropos to real life, whether Vietnam was conquered or not. Yeah,
it's just going to take a little while longer.
Yeah, exactly. So they go to DEFCON 2. Everything's looking very, very grim for all of humanity. Dan and Rorschach, right? They're like, okay, so there's definitely somebody going around trying to kill off all the superheroes. Rorschach suspects that his being captured by the police was not a coincidence, because the reason he got caught in the first place is because he was going to visit an old supervillain named Moloch. And when he arrived at Moloch's apartment, he discovers Moloch dead. And it's pinned, the death of Moloch is pinned on Rorschach. So he's like, okay, I obviously didn't kill the guy. I don't know who else would have thought to kill this guy, but it's whoever is going around killing all the superheroes, right? So they decide to go and talk to Adrian, because he was the last person who had his life attempt on his life. Everything's just falling a little too cleanly into place, right? So let's go talk to Adrian. So they arrive and discover that Adrian's not at he's not at his office. He's not at his apartment. He's nowhere to be found. And so they're digging around on his desk, and they find out that Adrian, okay, so it's 1 minute to midnight. Fingers on the button. Someone's going to fucking shoot some nukes. better be Nixon, right? Ahead of anybody else.
Henry Kissinger is just vibrating in excitement.
Oh my god!
Oh my god! When I saw Kissinger in that movie, I was like, of course he makes an appearance. Why wouldn't he? Like,
it's surprising that Kissinger is only. I think he's name dropped in the book, but he doesn't make actual appearance.
Yeah.
Probably because Moore didn't want his house to get.
Yeah, Alan Moore didn't want a fishing accident.
No, absolutely not. It's also probably why Alan Moore has never left his Earth. So it's 1 minute to midnight. Dan and Rorschach, they discover that Adrian is the masked killer and that he's holed up in, of course, an Antarctic secret base. And so they're like, let's go to the South
most
Pole.
Super villainy shit ever.
Exactly. Yep. It's also, interestingly, though, Superman's Fortress of Solitude is in the Antarctic. Right. So he's playing a kind of like parallel there because Ozymandias is supposed to be, a good guy. Right. Yeah. And he's got a cape and he's, very almost godlike with the exception of not having any superpowers. So yeah, they're like, let's get him. Let's figure out what the fuck is going on. And this is where we finally get Adrian's origin story. I mean, throughout the entire book, you get in little pieces here and there of everybody's origin, going as far as explicitly for an entire chapter with solely dedicated to Dr. Manhattan, to Eddie Blake's kind of chopped up via flashback origin stories and stuff like that. But
it's also worth mentioning that everyone else in the book looks super fucking cool, and Ozymandias has the worst fit of any superhero of all time, which had to be on purpose.
Costume. Absolutely, yeah. He's got a purple domino mask, gold armor up and down his body with a big purple cape, and I think he's got like a little purple skirt thing going on too. Right?
Yeah, he looks like a fucking high camp Roman centurion. It's it's so silly. I love it. Well, and everyone else looks cool as shit.
Yeah, everyone's got great costumes. With the exception of Dr. Manhattan, who used to wear a pair of like shorts and then he's just like, fuck it. I don't even feel cold. Why do I need to hide my shame? Fuck you. So dicks out everywhere, right? All the time. Yeah. But Adrian looks like a Roman centurion, sort of, or actually, as is revealed, his number one, like he looks up to Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
Which
red flag.
Sus. Always. Yeah. Huge red flag.
Anytime anyone's like a big Alexander the Great guy, get as far away as possible.
Yeah. And he's this entire time been devising a way to save the world. He thinks that it's not good enough to just fight crime on the street level. He's trying to find a way for everybody on the planet to come together and be united, but he needs to figure out how to do that first. And so this mask killer thing is kind of, so we're finding out why. In fact, Adrian's telling everybody, Dan and Rorschach rather, all of it. He's just letting it all out. He's saying, hey, guess what? I killed the comedian because he discovered an island that I bought where I was building a giant psychic squid monster, which I am going to teleport to the middle of fucking downtown New York City. And upon its arrival, it will explode. The psychic brain will send out a shockwave to everybody else on the planet that convinces everybody that an entire alien civilization of similar squid monsters is about to invade planet Earth. And our dimension, which also is planet, because they're interdimensional. And everyone's going to lose their minds, including Nixon and what at this point was Gorbachev, right?
Yeah.
And it'll halt all hostilities around the world because 3 million New Yorkers are about. And Dan and Rorschach are like, why did you just show we can fight you and stop it? And Adrian retorts, I already did it 30 minutes. And it's great. It's beautiful.
And what follows is like the 4 greatest pages of any comic. Like the art is incredible.
Yeah, because what it is exactly, it's 4 45-degree angle shots, as it were, full full page spreads. Well, it's not a spread, but anyway, it's splash. That's the word.
Yeah.
4 full page splash pages of just destruction, death, everything. It opens up the last chapter of the book with just a full-on shot of this squid monster dead, and all these people that were going to this concert dead, and across the street, everybody at the diner dead. Across the street from that, everybody at the taxi company and the news agent fucking dead. And so everyone
there's
dies.
A great fucking shot of Madison Square Garden.
Yes,
with a big band poster on the front, and like the headliner is Pale Horse, and the opener act is Crystal Knocked, and it's just broken glass all up and down the street,
and bodies,
fucking incredible.
Just bodies strewn everywhere. In fact, even the 2 cops, the 2 detectives at the beginning of the story are in that scene, and they're just dead. One of them's got like his chin rested on the cop car while the rest of his body is just like prostrate. It's amazing.
And there's a shot of a movie theater that's showing the day the earth stood still. Yes. And then there's another one that has a movie camera newspaper that just has war question mark on it. I had these up in my room for a while.
Oh, nice.
And they're just incredible.
Rachel, here's
wow.
And the clock's at midnight. Like every detail's awesome.
Right. Yep. Cool. The clock strikes midnight, and there's the tentacle of the squid monster, and it's blasting through the fucking buildings.
Oh, wow.
And the whole rest of the comic is these like 9 panel per page things by and large. And then like I think this is the first time you get like a full
I believe you're right.
Scene after scene of just like a full page, which
just
is
full destruction.
Fucking cool.
It's amazing.
That's awesome.
Like and then to find out too within the pages of the book that the evil master plan already happened. Like just that fucked me up so much more than anything else in the book. You know, like it's just reveal after reveal. Like it's so good. So where were we? Oh, now Dr. Manhattan and Laurie have just arrived on Earth to discover this insane scene of death and destruction. Literally 3 million New Yorkers dead, right? So Dr. Manhattan, he's kind of piecing together why he can't see into the future. And it's because I think it was tachyon fields is what he says. It doesn't really matter. Point is, it's some science fiction gobbledygook. And he follows the trail of the science atoms or whatever to the
science particles.
The science particles to this Antarctic base where Adrian, Dan, and Rorschach chatting. So they go there, and it's a weird little reunion of the crime busters, the 5 remaining living ones, that is, where Adrian explains, okay, here's why I did it. You know, he explains that if he figured that if he could construct this monster, if he could invent this kind of narrative that the world was about to be destroyed by an outside source, that internally everybody on planet Earth should get along to potentially fight against this outer threat. And the logic, I mean, it kind of makes and so it works. This is the big thing, is that it actually works. And because on one wall is just a bunch of televisions, and they're all tuned to the news, and it's like reports coming in from New York City, intergalactic monster, 3 million dead. And the final thing is USSR and the United States have called off any and all war. War is done. War is canceled. They canceled war. And Adrian he throws his fists in the air like a kid, and he goes, I did it. And it's probably a lot more powerful if I weren't to yell into the mic, but still, you get the idea. Right?
He goes, yay!
Yay! I did it! You know? And so he explains to them all this shit that, like, if you guys tell, it'll unravel this entire plan, and we're all going to go back to war. So what do you want to do? Rorschach is like, well, I'm dedicated to the truth because that's my personal philosophy, which is garbage. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to tell everybody. But the rest of them are like, okay, well, how are you even going to do that? You can't leave. We're in the South Pole, man. we've all agreed to Adrian's plan, even though it's insane. We better not tell anybody because the world will descend into just fucking chaos, right? And so Rorschach tries to leave. Dr. Manhattan stops him, blows off his head with the point of a finger, and that's where it ends as far as like the strict narrative, with the exception of Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt. He's meditating in a separate room, and Dr. Manhattan walks into the room to kind of chat with him. And Adrian says, "So what are you going to do now?" And Dr. Manhattan's like, "I like this life thing. I think it's cool. I'm going to go somewhere out in space and make my own little unit. I think that might be fun." And Adrian's like, "All right, good luck, buddy." And then he asks, "By the way, did I do it? Did I do the right thing? Was this the right thing to do?" And Dr. Manhattan's like, "Who knows? Probably not." You know, there is no such thing as the right thing or the wrong thing. It's just the thing that you did, and you have to live with the consequence. And then that ends. He fucks off. Dan and Lori fall asleep after having sex again. You know, they just witnessed the destruction of 3 million people.
It's the greatest aphrodisiac.
Exactly. So they bang, they fall asleep, and then it cuts to, I think it's supposed to be a year later, but it kind of reads as like 6 months later. It's a very sharp, quick cut to the final six. No, it is 5 pages of the book, which is the epilogue. And this kind of liberal utopia now. Technology has improved even further. Teleportation is kind of going to be quickly becoming a commercial commodity now that Adrian has developed it just to send a giant squid monster to kill everybody. And he establishes his sort of progressive marketing campaign for his line of fragrance, which is now Millennium. Dan and Lori, they're living together under new identities and even new hair color and hairstyles. They went blonde, and Dan grew out this awful mustache. And yeah, but the book ends with Dan and Lori visiting Lori's mom, the original Silk Spectre, to kind of just give her like a little heads up. Hey, we're okay. Everything's fine. Merry Christmas, by the way, because this ends on Christmas. A Briton writ, an Englishman writ. And they kind of scamper off like, okay, well, we're going to go back into hiding now. And they kind of have like a little aside, and Dan's like, "What do you think about doing some more superhero?" And Lori's like, "Yeah, cool. But this time I'm going to carry it," because it's to imply that she's kind of taking up now the comedian model of superhero as opposed to the Silk Spectre model. And we finally get to the last 2 pages of the book where there's this, throughout the entire series, there's this right-wing newspaper rag called the New Frontiersman, NF, National Front. It was this whole thing in England.
Yeah.
And so it's more significant probably to Alan Moore than it was to American readers, but all the same. New Frontiersman, extreme right-wing, potentially neo-Nazi, but it's never explicitly stated that they are such. They're like a Breitbart, kind of thing. So they're struggling to run a new piece because the editor-in-chief, is really not into this whole Russia being cool thing. He's not into it. He's not into the liberal, like the hyper neoliberal utopia that everyone now lives in. He's not into the making friends with Russia thing. And so he's just like trying to figure out what to put in his fucking newspaper. And so he sends off his one assistant. I mean, this newspaper, as it were, is run by 2 guys, the editor and the assistant. He tells the assistant, "You know what? Just find something in the slush pile to put into the end of the fucking paper, please, while I eat my stupid hamburger." The assistant is wearing a t-shirt with a yellow smiley face, and he's also eating. And as he takes a bite, a dollop of ketchup splashes onto the smiley face at 11 o'clock, and he reaches for the slush pile, inside of which is Rorschach's journal, which details the entire fucking thing. And the book ends with the phrase, oh shit, I have to look it up. It ends with, "I leave it entirely in your hand," implying, well, we'll get into the announcement, but that's where we end. The end, I guess, of the book. Yeah, it's very character heavy. It's very plot driven, but there's a lot going on, and I think we a little bit in part 4. This is, I told you this is long. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I hope there's a way to chop it up somehow in post, but
well, yeah. I mean, do we want to do that? Do we want to like have a bit that's like an end, and then we can do this in 2 episodes?
I mean, it's up to you. You're the
Shark, what do you think? And Rachel,
we can see once we get the audio.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean. Have a
like record and then we'll get to it in the next episode, and then have a little bit of a break, do another intro, and split it up into 2 episodes that we release separately.
I mean, I don't think we need to record something. If we get the audio and it's like endlessly long, I can just riff on something and end an episode there.
Okay.
Shark in the editing bay, as if Dr. Manhattan is saying, no, this is too much. I'm going to pop Rorschach's head.
Yeah. This okay, that took a fucking hour to get through that.
Yeah.
And that is the abridged version.
I know, very abridged version.
Yeah.
Like
the Spark Notes of Watchmen.
This is the Sparks Notes, for fuck's sake.
You talked about so many things, and I was like, I'm not going to mention the paneling of that scene like 3 times.
I know, like it's the best part of the book. Is
you were talking about Manhattan in Vietnam, and
so
that panel
Barry
of, like, where he's one.
Yeah, it's
Barry is staring at the door.
It's so good.
I think he could use a little bit of a break.
Yeah, I'm gonna piss.
Okay. So I will. I'll try to keep him short.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
reconvene in like 10.
Yeah,
Shoot a message on Signal if I'm not back yet.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. No, that's such a great panel though.
It's so good because it takes up, because as you were saying, it's a 9-panel grid, which I'm glad you mentioned. Because it's significant in and of itself to the story. I'm going to try to pull up that panel, but it takes up 2/3 of the fucking page.
Yeah.
That's how literally explosive it is.
Yeah. And like just the whole paneling of this book is fucking amazing so many times.
Yeah. And it deserves all the love it gets. But as I was writing like this script, I was thinking, I could make my own podcast where or like YouTube series where I just talk about each character, each issue, like every single decision that was ever made, and like I could run this fucking thing for like, I don't know,
like how people do a rewatch podcast, just like page for page of the Watchmen.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Oh, that'd be so much fucking fun.
Yeah, I genuinely want to do that. And then I was also, because so I live in State College, PA. I'm right across the street essentially from Penn State, and my neighbor is an English professor. She handles all the PhDs and dissertations and stuff. And I was like, I have my master's degree. I kind of want my PhD. I might do my PhD on fucking Watchmen.
A Watchmen PhD would be awesome.
It would be amazing, right? Because there's also like, I'm going to kind of get into it with the rest of the script, but I was noticing, I mean, I'm not much of I didn't study philosophy per se here, but I watch Plastic Pills on YouTube, I got Phenomenology of Spirit, you know, I got some Deleuze and Guattari and Nietzsche and so on, Foucault and shit. So like, I've been kind of reading on all this stuff since the last time I read this book, which was, again, I was still a Christian. And I'm like, wait a minute, like each character is like a separate ontology, a separate philosophy. And I could really, really, really get into it. And I'm going to like touch upon it a little bit in the rest of the script, but like, I could dedicate an entire episode of something to just Dr. Manhattan, what he thinks about the world, why he thinks about the world this way. Philosophers who have discussed things like determinism and such that could like really just stretch it the fuck out.
Yeah.
And like,
I mean the Dr. Manhattan episode, if you were doing something like that, would take forever because it like is everything from nihilism to Calvinism.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Fuck it. One of the coolest pages. Yeah. So
I don't know if Rachel is still in the chat, but that's the destruction of Vietnam in 2/3 of a fucking page. Okay.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's such a good book. Yes, I guess. Fuck you. There's no Batman in Watchmen. That's actually a point that I wrote down, and I don't know if you read it, but that's
no. I read the Alan Moore quote about
Batman.
Well, yeah.
There are going to be a lot of Alan Moore quotes.
Alan Moore's
coming
great.
up. He's fantastic. He's wonderful.
My favorite Alan Moore quote is that one time someone was like, "Why are you a wizard?" And he was like, "It seemed like the natural end of my artistic career."
He already had the beard.
Yeah,
I'm going like you, as y'all can see. I'm going for it too. I got the long hair. It's getting there. I'm getting.
You'll get there. Moory. The Wizard of State College.
I mean, the Wizard of Central Pennsylvania.
Ooh,
redacted Pennsylvania.
There you go.
Pennsylvania.
I don't actually care if people know where I'm at, but okay. Part 4, who watches the Watchmen? Let's talk about character, because as you probably guessed from my very long plot synopsis, it's a very character heavy book, of which I only spoke about 6. And there are way more than that. There's a whole original superhero crew from the 40s. I discussed, Laurie's mom, who was the original Silk Spectre. There's also an original Night Owl, and so on. There's an entire kind of Greek chorus of different characters that just of New Yorkers who just inhabit the world that Moore created for this book. So, but suffice to say, let's talk about the 6 main subjects of Watchmen. But before I get into that, I wanted to know what you might have thought of the story and or the characters, particularly from Aaron and Rachel, who haven't read the book.
No, I read the book.
Oh, you have? Well,
then a long time ago. Yeah.
I just want to know what y'all may have guessed, or like how you interpret these characters, like who they are. So I suppose real quick, I'll just run down the character list again. Is that cool?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
We got Rorschach, aka Walter Kovacs. He's the detective. He's smelly and he wears a mask that he calls his face. We have Dan Dryberg. He's an inventor, a Birdman guy who, studies birds and is a bird in his superhero persona of Night Owl. We've got Dr. Manhattan, aka John Osterman, who was a former nuclear physicist who then became a blue god man. Edward Blake, the comedian, who is not terribly funny and likes to shoot Vietnamese people. And we got Adrian Veidt, supposedly the smartest man in the world. Also one of the strongest, like regular type humans in the world. He's a gymnast and stuff. He's he's like a business owner. He owns like several multinational corporations, and he goes by Ozymandias. And then lastly, Laurie Jupiter Juspecic. I'm gonna
again, Laurie, write in, let us know.
Please
how annoyed
tell me
are.
how the hell to say it. And she's Dr. Manhattan's girlfriend, the original Silk Spectre's daughter, Blake's daughter. So that's who we got. So, what do y'all think about Rorschach? Let's talk about him.
No, you're gonna go individually. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Actually, no. How about this? Let's just start with what do we think about all of them collectively, without just based on
the 7-hour episode.
Yeah.
Well, I really like that it's character heavy. I think it gives like everyone can latch on to like a different character that they find most interesting, or like I think it just gives it a lot of depth. But yeah, I don't know. I found like Rorschach's character very interesting. One, because I was just curious as to how his mask was moving just like all the time. I'm like, this is just like a bag. I don't know what kind of mask this is, but it's moving on its own.
Yeah. It's really weird. He worked formerly as like a tailor's assistant, and a rich woman wanted a dress made of this weird material that is like plastic on the outside with a layer of ink, sort of kind of some goop, black sci-fi goop in between that and a white linen behind it.
Okay, that makes
so that's how
sense.
It moves around.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it's very sci-fi.
Okay. Yeah, and then like the Ozymandias character is giving like Tony Stark vibes.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
Rich guy. Too much money.
And then I don't know. I mean, the Laurie's character is, fine. I think it's a very stereotypical woman superhero. Like her main thing is all about, who she's dating, or like you know, just her focus goes from Dr. Manhattan to
Night Owl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was pretty stable. But no, overall, I really like how you can really dive into each one of their backstories. Depending on, you know, interesting. But
yeah.
I don't know. Aaron, what do you think?
Yeah, it has been a long time since I've read the book. I think I've only read it a couple of times. But like I think I read it after meeting you, so it was like the latter half of my college undergrad bit.
Did
so
I talk about it a lot?
I think you did. So like I figured, you know, they're all representations of like a different ideology or philosophy kind of thing. And once you kind of know that as a springboard, it's pretty easy to pick up where all the characters are coming from. So, you know, I thought it was a great book. And the thing that I'm glad you asked this, because I did what you did, and I tried to get all my friends to read it after I did. And there was one dude who I've alluded to on this podcast before who read it. I think he finished it in one sitting. And I said, so what'd you think? And he goes, oh, you're like the comedian.
To you?
Yeah. And I was like, what?
What? What?
And he identified the most with Rorschach.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
What reasoning did he give for you as the comedian?
That doesn't make any fucking sense.
He
because
thought
you're
I was
funny?
a nihilist.
Back then, Aaron really hated Vietnamese children.
I really hated Vietnamese children, especially women.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was all about sexual assault. This is not true. Just to clarify for my many enemies who listen to this podcast. No, I don't know. I think it was just because I was cynical. Like, well, I mean, I still am, but like more so back then.
Okay.
It was a weird thing.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, at the time, I think I had, you know, when you're young, you like to map people, you know, to different characters. And I think once you kind of grow up a bit, and you grow up a bit, and you're especially like, it's especially nerds. And it's like, this is not a great thing to relate anyone to in this comic.
But I've definitely had my fair share of conversations where it's like, so which character of whatever superhero group or whatever are you?
But and then like
I'm Nightcrawler,
as you get older, you're like you realize that there are things that it's more fun to talk about, and like this one is not so fun to try and relate people to.
It's not. And there's a reason for that.
And
which I'm gonna bring up soon, but
so it's I picked up, you know, all these characters are different little philosophical representations of everyone, and I think it's the thing. It's a good litmus test to kind of read other people is like their take on if there is a right character in this book. And I think, you know, that last scene between Ozymandias Veidt and Dr. Manhattan sums up a lot of what I like. It kind of started landing on after, you know, in grad school and afterward is like, is there a right thing in any situation? Like, how do you determine what is right? And like, should you even try to do any of this stuff? You know, and there are no answers to these things, and yada yada yada. Anyway, to summarize, good book, read it.
Yeah. Yes. Who of us though have not decided to end all wars with a giant?
That is, you know, it's my goal in life.
Yeah,
I'm working on it now. Barry
By the way,
and I are getting
the face of the squid monster is very vaginal. I don't know if y'all noticed that.
Yeah.
I can show that again though. But the eyeball is the clitoris. The mouth is the opening, and but all it brings is death and destruction, and not fun or sexual pleasure. Anyway, where is it?
Wow.
The mouth is actually the butthole in it. Yeah. Anyway, it's very sexual and and it's like kind of a
interesting choice.
A twist on because you know you're thinking missiles, which are phallic, and then the squid monster is lady parts. Interesting stuff. Shark, what do you think about the? Oh no, go ahead.
It's okay. I was just thinking about Rorschach, like how we wanted to go and tell the world like what actually happened, and you know, like why would they think that anyone would actually believe him?
That's a good point.
Like they could have easily just let him go. Tell people, and then everyone would have just disregarded everything he says as like, you know, as a crazy fuck. Just let him do it his thing.
Yeah. I mean, he'd already been captured by the police. He'd already been imprisoned and then broken out. So whether he shows up with the mask on or off, he's not going to get very far.
Mm-hmm.
So
I thought that was just like an interesting
And one of the things that you had to gloss over is like, this is a guy who has a record and a strong history of severe violence.
Yeah, he's got an entire chapter / issue dedicated to him through the lens of the perspective of his psychiatrist, his prison psychiatrist. And his story fucks up the psychiatrist so badly that it ruins his marriage and his life. It's fucking crazy.
But yeah, I mean, that is a good little thought thing to go into, is like, would anyone believe him? And it's like, you want to say no, but then you look at a lot of the stuff that gets circulated through disinfo and social media, and it's like,
who was president of the United States in 2016? Who's president of the United States now? And even if it's somebody without that level of, I guess, fame or whatever, you're going to have these kinds of people going back to the Greeks, fucking crazy soapbox type people who are just like, these prophets or whomever who are shouting like, this is what happens, this is what happened, these conspiracy theorists. And like, some people will believe, people won't.
And he goes to an outlet that's, like you said, Breitbart or Alex Jones. And
and so does that story get, but anyway, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I just wanted to find it's okay. Finally,
hey, you know what? Who are you to tell me what to do?
I don't know. Flipping you off now. Shark, what did you think? What do you think of the characters in this book? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I don't. As like someone who's read it a few times, things like that, I don't want to jump the gun on some of the things you're probably going to bring up here. But I think the thing that's great about Watchmen is that every character is about like a moral or ethical system taken to an extreme.
Yes.
And like it's like reductio ad absurdum. It's like trying to prove that like any philosophy is stupid at its endpoint. Which I'm a huge proponent of, and I love that about all the characters.
But that said, you're a huge Rorschach fan.
Yeah.
Huge Rorschach fan.
Everyone is.
If there's two things I love.
He was the only one who was right.
Yeah.
In fact, 100% right. No notes.
There's two things I love. It's people with a strong moral compass who just like to kill other folks.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite type of person.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's dive into it. I do want to touch on like kind of each character individually, but very briefly. Because Shark and Aaron, you both kind of touched on it. Like these characters that Moore wrote, he's definitely trying to say something about not just philosophy in general, but about how when different people from different backgrounds come together to form a sort of common cause, already you're going to get conflict within that, because everybody's bringing in their own interpretation of the world into that common cause. And when the common cause is this nebulous idea of justice, it's going to get very fucking messy very fucking quick. So we've got these 6 people. The comedian, who I've always interpreted as staunch authoritarian. That's kind of his thing, but he calls himself the comedian. So why do we think that might be? Because he's the guy with the gun, and I didn't mention this earlier, but he's also the guy with the gimp mask on. And
that's right.
Previously, he wore a clown suit, not the makeup, but he wore the suit and a domino mask. And then later he goes on with the gimp mask on and fucking Uzis and stuff, and he's blowing people away. So definitely authoritarian, but what do we think the comedian part may kind of represent in terms of the philosophy of this character?
I didn't know I was signing up for a seminar class.
I mean, I could just say it, but I find it's more interesting.
No, I think that he gives some line, if I'm right, about like his justification for it is like the world, all of this stuff that is going on is meaningless and you have to laugh about it, and why not just take it to this violent extreme and embrace the absurdity of it all.
Which is like itself a misreading of like both nihilism and absurdism, which I think is what like Alan Moore is poking fun at, that like the whole point of either of those philosophical movements is drawing meaning from meaninglessness, not like just fully embracing meaninglessness, but like
I mean, he's every idiot's perception of nihilism, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, when your college friend read Nietzsche for the first time, and now you guys don't talk anymore. He's like that guy.
Yeah. There's a guy who's a couple degrees removed from me socially, and he refers to himself as a nihilist, but he doesn't. His perception is just, well, I'm just going to drink my life.
That sucks
because he doesn't have to have a job, so he just.
Ugh, what a drag. What a terrible way to read Nietzsche.
Yeah,
I don't think he's read Nietzsche. I think he just has heard the term nihilism, and
he just saw someone smoking outside a bar one time.
Yeah, exactly.
That was awesome.
He watched Big Lebowski and was like, I want to be like those German guys.
Yeah.
But this kind of twisted interpretation of absurdism. It's stated in the book that the comedian that is, everything that he does is a performance, because so he visits Moloch, that supervillain guy, in the middle of the night, and he's drunk and he's crying and he's going, it's a joke, it's all a joke. But just prior to that, Moloch says, I think this was his last performance. So it's all, to him, it's a big show. Life in general is just a big show, and like, why not just make the biggest show by killing as many fucking people as you can under the guidance of the United States? Why the fuck not? He's an American. That's what Americans do. Shoot people. Fucking let's go. That's kind of how I see the comedian there. Later on in Alan Moore's career, he would write a book called Batman the Killing Joke, which sort of dives into the background or a potential background of the Joker, his famous character. And Joker says something very similar, where it's like, everything's a joke. Life is difficult and painful, and the only way to escape that pain is to just laugh it off. And also murder thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, however many people the Joker has killed in his time. So that's comedian. Then we go to Rorschach. What do we think about him? I don't think I mentioned yet that he is also very. That's a big key characterization.
It's important.
That Moore wanted everybody to know he's very smelly. He doesn't wash. And he disguises himself as a homeless person when he's not fighting crime. There are a number of scenes, in fact, where before you even see Rorschach, or a character sees Rorschach in front of them, they smell something first. Smell. So that's kind of important. So what do we think about this guy this man without a face? Anyone?
Yeah, for me, like, Rorschach is, I think, like, Rorschach's relationship to, like, right-wing politics is, like, the core of his character for me, because it's this moral code writ large. The idea of, like, he's this downtrodden,
great phrase that I don't use enough, writ large.
He's this, like, downtrodden everyman who invents his own morality to, like, put on the world, and just, like, ruins it with it a lot.
Yep. And importantly, he invents his own, you could say he invents his own persona, because again, he calls the mask his face, but he also just appropriates. He doesn't create Rorschach, because Rorschach was already a clinical psychologist who developed the ink blot test, which determined whether, I forget exactly how it was supposed to work, but you look at the ink blots, and there are 9 of them officially, and you're supposed to kind of see what's in the ink blot, and supposed to kind of tell the therapist and psychiatrist how the patient views the world. So he views the world through a mask that he's appropriated from another guy, and he doesn't really have any ideas of his own either. He just goes, this is right, this is wrong, and I punish the wrong. And everything that is right, that I feel is right, and that's it. End of story.
Yeah, there are 2 touch points for me for Rorschach. One is Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, which I think is pretty odd. Like, you read the book, every time Rorschach is doing a monologue, it's basically Bickle's thing as he's driving through New York.
Definitely.
And then objectivism through Ayn Rand. Those are the 2 touch points that I always kind of lean on for Rorschach.
That's what I have here. It definitely falls in line with Ayn Rand,
whatever. I think it's Ayn, but who cares? It's
welfare recipient Ayn Rand is the
yes.
Yes.
Famous welfare recipient and shit author Ayn Rand. There's this quote that she's got: the concept of man as a heroic being, with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute. End quote. That's Rorschach to a T, you know?
Yeah.
Rorschach, actually, if we're going to go into the background, remember the Charlton Comics characters I talked about?
Yep.
So Steve Ditko, co-creator of Spider-Man, he had a character called Mr. A. And Mr. A was an objectivist superhero. The comic book, it was an independent comic, and it was illustrated completely in black and white, specifically to call back to this black and white thinking of morality and justice. So a lot of Mr. A's comic book superhero endeavors is to go around, and it's a lot of dialogue and caption, just like Rorschach, where it's just him talking to the audience about, this is what is right, this is what is wrong, and I punish the wrong, and I am always right.
Yeah.
Also, there's a quote at the end of Rorschach's chapter here from Nietzsche, and it reads, quote, "Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you." Yeah.
Great fucking Nietzsche line.
It's a great line. And that often, however, gets interpreted, or I feel misinterpreted, that Rorschach follows a kind of nihilism, just like the comedian does. But I don't see that as something Rorschach does on his own. I don't think he's like actively calling himself a nihilist. I think Moore is drawing parallels to Nietzsche within that chapter, but I don't think it was necessarily Moore's intent to call Rorschach, or rather interpret Rorschach as being a nihilist. I don't.
Yeah, and I think to like really see how that's working, you have to like understand that like Kant came around in the European philosophy scene and ruled that shit with an iron fist in the way like Aristotle had before him for like a long time. And then Nietzsche comes around and he's rejecting Kantian deontology, which is this moral idea that like there are frameworks, and so like moral frameworks, and the good of an action has nothing to do with its results. It's based on whether it's like innately good or bad based on like your moral beliefs beforehand. And so like Nietzsche's like, hey, wait, this is all bullshit. And Rorschach is like very much a deontologist. He has like these strong, robust moral frameworks, and he doesn't give a shit about the results of his actions or like the suffering he does on the world. There's like good or bad. And like the problem with that is that deontology and nihilism, despite being opposites, look pretty much the same in execution.
Yeah, they look very, very similar.
If you believe the world has no meaning, or actions themselves have meaning greater than the world, you're just killing people for no reason. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't have anything else to say. I think that kind of just covers it. Right?
Great guy.
Rachel, do you have anything that you wanted to chime in about this character, this smelly detective man with no face?
No, I don't really have anything to add. I was just Googling deontology to find out what Sharky was talking about.
It's fucking horrible. Never read Kant.
There is a great quote from Moore about meeting someone who admired Rorschach.
Yeah.
And basically like
I've pulled a bunch of quotes from Moore, but I don't think it's one of these is them.
Okay. So basically like Moore was talking about he was being interviewed, and he was telling the story about how he wanted to make Rorschach as his idea of someone who would really, really like Batman.
Yeah.
As a smelly nerd. And someone comes up to him and says, "Oh, I really love Rorschach." And Moore says, "I never want to hear from you again. Get away from me."
Alan Moore has very strong stances on the "is Batman a cop" Twitter discourse.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
And yes, Batman is a cop.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so then we get into Night Owl, who is sort of presented as like a very boring guy until he puts the suit on, and then he's this Lothario, he's this fucking he can do anything. So I don't know, what do y'all think? About him, about Dan Dreiberg, aka Night Owl 2, the second Night Owl.
Yeah.
Because he also doesn't have any original fucking ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes like Night Owl and Silk Spectre kind of hard ones to place in a category.
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of have to go with like a weird, like a weird psychology read of these characters as like masculinity and like how American ideals encourage this kind of behavior of like putting on a persona that is itself a reflection of the ideal of masculinity or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And how if you internalize that to such a big extent that, to be, as crass as this is, like, you can't get it up unless you are in this persona that is not you.
Right. Well, it's a crass book. You can talk.
Yeah. But like how that applies to American culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like the closest I can get to like trying to peg Night Owl as like.
Are you trying to peg Night Owl?
A bottom. Bazing!
Bazinga!
But like trying to slot Night Owl, and then Silk Spectre into a distinct role,
a category, as
because it's like Rorschach's comedian is pretty easy,
right?
Ozymandias is pretty easy.
They're all
Dr. Manhattan, simple-ish.
Yeah,
but those two are. I mean, they're interesting, but not like in the text,
Right. And the impotence thing is definitely. I mean, it's a big deal because there's an entire scene that plays out where Dan and Laurie are trying to have sex. And meanwhile, the television is showing a gymnastics performance by Adrian Veidt, their former colleague and fellow superhero. And so he's trying to get it up while meanwhile fucking Adrian's just like flipping on bars like this. Right? So yeah, Dan's like a weird one, but when I was reading it this time around, I noticed something interesting. He owns 2 buildings in New York. So think about it. He has purchased, one is as a warehouse, it's an old warehouse, and the other is his brownstone that he lives in. So he's it's not exactly explicitly stated, but it's very well, with real estate in New York City, maybe he owns the entire block that he lives because so his he's modeled after a character called Blue Beetle, who is an inventor. Dan Dreiberg is also an inventor, and he's invented all these things, this Night Owl stuff, including the owl ship, which is like a giant pill-shaped flying machine but it's parked in his basement. And he states that the owl ship, it goes down an old subway tunnel and comes out in this abandoned or this unused warehouse that he bought a while ago, he says, and he just brushes it off like it's no big deal. When Laurie asks him where he even makes his money, he's like, sometimes I'll write an article for an ornithologist or an ornithology journal and stuff like this. So what do y'all think of that? He's a New York City property owner. He's an inventor. He's a scientist.
The implication for me is like he comes from some kind of money.
He comes from a lot of money.
Yeah, but like just down the line, you get these. You get like on the East Coast, like these very, very blue blood families that just have this money because maybe they came over originally and just got land that they've held on to for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so like Dreiberg always hits me as like one of these guys.
Yeah. But as an inventor, so he and Adrian are the wealthy one, right? They're the rich guy. Adrian is significantly more wealthy than Dan, but Dan is still not terribly, he's not poor by any stretch.
Yeah.
There are licensing deals that are mentioned in the comic book. Adrian has a line of action figures and toys, and he also has a licensing deal with Dan to make a toy version of the owl ship. It's in one of there's like,
forgot about that.
At the end of one of the issues, there's like, you see all the stuff that's on Adrian's desk, and one of them is like prototypes of this like action figure. So it's also implied that Dan has been kind of selling the Night Owl thing for a while. So that's where he's making some money there.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the money. The way that I see Night Owl actually is the way that he downplays just how well off he is, I think shows that he's a kind of like a classic cynic. If you think about it. He's trying to lead this like pious, this like virtuous life, but he also doesn't want to show off his wealth, but he does because it's the only way he can get it up. But he does that by putting on this persona of Night Owl. So this is how I kind of interpret this.
I get that. And that plays into the owl imagery of like the owl being Athena knowledge.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then on top of that, he also just kind of hangs back and lets the other characters do whatever the fuck they want. And then he'll step in and kind of do his thing every now and again, which brings in the consequentialism that he's kind of, I think, represents as well. Okay. Because there's a scene where Rorschach is going around questioning dudes at in a bar, and he's like snapping people's fingers. And Night Owl just kind of hangs back and is like, okay, whatever. And he does that throughout the entire course of the comic. There's a scene where he and Comedian, of all people, are trying to put down like a sort of a riot that's going on. And Night Owl is just sitting in his little owl ship, and he's like making an announcement over the intercom. And meanwhile, Comedian is on the outside of the ship hanging onto the window, and he's got his fucking gun in one hand, and he's like about to shoot either with rubber bullets or live ammunition. Who fucking knows? He doesn't fucking care. That's for Comedian doesn't. And neither does Night Owl, I don't think. I don't think really Night Owl really gives a shit, because he's also at the end one of the first, if not the first, to kind of just give in to Adrian's scheme, to be like, yeah, fuck it. We just won't tell anybody. And 3 million people are dead. Whatever. At least there's no war now.
I mean, that's the thing about like both him and Silk Spectre, is I think that like everyone else has a vision for the world, and they're just like, they're the fucking like Freakonomics guys, or like liberal capitalism people. They think that like minor changes in the way the world works, enacted by fucking lunatics, is like how the world keeps going. And they have like no vision because of that. Like, life's good, they're fine, and they view themselves as good people. And like that's the end. It's like pure virtue ethic philosophy. There's like nothing that matters. They also have taken their moral position to a place where it like doesn't affect the world. They're just good people and fuck everything else, which is like absurd.
That's definitely how they see themselves.
Is
that, well, we're the good guys because we said so. We're
and like look
at the costume and
like look at how cultured and smart we are, and like how ethical we are in our personal lives, and they don't interact with the systems at all in a way that's like very liberal.
Exactly. Yep. I think you hit the nail on the head there. The one final thing I want to kind of touch on is his reactionism, because
also very liberal.
Liberal reaction for sure. Because he's the second Night Owl, right? He hangs out on a weekly basis, I believe, with the original Night Owl and drinks beers with him, and they talk about the good old days. So that's that reaction there of like, if only I could bring the good old days back. And so he's doing that as his version of Night Owl, as his version of being a good superhero, of being a champion of justice, is to kind of try to bring in this like now obsolete view of how the world ought to be, and really just using all of his wealth and all of his privilege and power to do. So that's how I see the Night Owl. He's not a good.
Hadn't thought about that.
And again, this is all stuff I only just kind of picked up on while reading it this time around, but I always knew that there was something to all these characters that is more than just the big bombastic ones: Rorschach, Ozymandias, Comedian, Dr. Manhattan. There was like, there's something else about Dan and Laurie that I was trying to figure it out, and I think I figured it out. Silk Spectre, Laurie, I think, is a liberty. It's unfortunate that the quote only female character in the book is libertarian, but this is all coming to a point that I'm getting to eventually with all these people. But even if you like her costume is yellow, and that
I had not thought about Ann Cap stuff with
which Moore would be super aware of.
Absolutely. There's a famous photograph of Alan Moore wearing a red t-shirt with a black sickle and hammer and sickle, that with the sleeves off, and that's like one of his like old author photos that he would put into the ends of his books. so he knows, I mean, he's very, very well aware of I guess otherwise niche political philosophies. And so, having now, it's also interesting to note that Dave Gibbons has gone on record saying he didn't always agree with what Moore wanted to say with his character, which I take to understand as politically Gibbons and Moore are very different. I don't know how much, but I just think that they. But
Gibbons has also been more willing to license things out to DC, right?
Yes, he's the one. He's really the one. He's kind of cashing.
Yeah.
John Higgins, the colorist, not so much, which is unfortunate. But without getting too much further into that, she's got the black and yellow outfit. She's the daughter of a famous person, the original Silk Spectre, who went by Sally Jupiter, by the way. She wouldn't, because it was wartime. It was the Second World War. She didn't want to reveal that she was Polish. So she changed her. Laurie later changes it back to Juspecek. Always a wacky one to say. But it's also interesting to know, Rachel, you pointed out that Laurie is always she's always talked about in relation to someone else, whether it's her mom, her lover, her parents or her lover, whoever that may be, Dr. Manhattan, Night Owl, or whatever. And so I think that is meant to kind of point out her desire for personal and individual liberty at all costs, to the point where she's willing to step into in between nuclear war to carve out her identity. And I think ultimately the book overall is about identity than anything. What do you think about that? Yeah.
I'd buy it.
Yeah.
You buy it?
Again, it's been a long time since I've read this book, and I really should have read it again recently. But that makes a lot more sense. Because again, like what I was saying earlier, like I wasn't clicking with like what these two were trying to slot in. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And then lastly, with that conversation she has with Dr. Manhattan, she of course also kind of represents humanism, the philosophical belief in the human, but in that sort of liberal kind of way where, advancements in technology, rationalism, etc., the Renaissance kind of humanism, that everything is, we're the most important people. We're the most important thing. And on the basis that she is put up in contrast against Dr. Manhattan, who is called God, I think that really kind of works its way into the text a lot, in that she's anti-theist, of course, even though she's sleeping with God in a lot of ways.
And I think there's something there about like her being the byproduct of like a kind, good-hearted person and a nihilist.
Yeah.
That like is very libertarian and very like humanist in a way that's detached to an unpleasant degree.
Yeah. I lost my note on that, but you picked it up. So thank you. And here's one other thing. She completely ignores like material analysis in favor of her like personal emotion. She's driven solely by emotion, and no matter what happens in the text or outside of it, based on implication, she doesn't fucking care. It's all about her and what she can get and how she can carve out herself in this world that has been that Moore created. And then we can move on very quickly to Dr. Manhattan. He's a determinist, obviously. Everything is just lined up. Determinism is, whatever is going to happen will happen no matter what. And that's just the way it ought to be. And nobody should worry or think about anything or have any emotion about any of that at all. So I drove somebody over with my car. Nothing I can do about it. It was going to happen. It was fate. He cannot and or will not alter his actions against what is predicted, even though he probably could. And it's pointed out by the comedian earlier in the book, where it's the scene in Vietnam where a woman comes up to Edward and she's pregnant and she says, "It's your baby." And he's like, "No, it fucking isn't." And he shoots her in the stomach and kills her and the baby. And so but meanwhile, Dr. Manhattan is kind of just standing in the background and he says, "Edward, don't." And then bang, he doesn't bother to intervene at all, even though he's saying, "Hey, you shouldn't do this." And Eddie pipes in and goes, you could have stopped me. You could have turned this gun into a fucking flower, but you didn't. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Manhattan's like, well, I couldn't because that's not how it was going to go down. Right. But it's like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. This guy who is supposed to be all powerful, and he doesn't do anything with that power other than what people tell him to do, or what he has determined himself is going to happen regardless. It's interesting that after the destruction of New York City is when he goes into space to create a new universe and create life himself. And then, of course, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, there's this great thing, like the Enlightenment's happening. We're getting really smart. We're learning. I mean, we're getting really dumb. We're learning a lot of like new things about how the world works, though. And there's this scientist and philosopher, Pierre-Simon Laplace, who comes up with this idea that if you could know the position and momentum of every atom in the universe, you could predict the future perfectly.
Oh.
It's called Laplace's demon, and it like plagues people for a while until, and I mean, like, any smart philosopher is just like, what a dumb fucking thing to say out loud. But it plagues the scientific community for a while, and it's not until we get quantum mechanics and like thermodynamic irreversibility and a couple other things where it's like knowing the material state of the world is not enough to predict the world, that like it needs some observational element to affect it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I think that is like Dr. Manhattan in a nutshell, kind of, the Laplace's demon, the idea that like the world doesn't need an observer.
Yeah, that's weird, because it's especially weird because Dr. Manhattan is supposed to be a physicist.
Yeah.
Right. And so he knows that the only way to make sense of the world is to observe it. But he's so far removed from it at the time of the events in the book. He's so completely detached that he doesn't even bother observing. He's just going with the flow.
Yeah. And the whole point of the end of the book is that like he actually can't see what's coming, that like chaos theory is true. Small changes in initial conditions create incredibly complex difficulties later on.
Yes.
Like, and Manhattan kind of breaks it back.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's elements of like, again, kind of quantum mechanics and that kind of thing. But I think there's a tie-in to sci-fi literature with Asimov's Foundation series.
Yes. Which
definitely delves into this, where you have the premise of it is a guy figures out that you can chart humanity at a broad scale and set things up to happen in a certain way.
Yes.
And like a critical aspect of that is that there are individual things that can happen that you cannot predict that alter.
Yeah,
exactly.
But then there's also I think there's a dramatic thing with Manhattan of the defeatism of prophecy.
Yeah. Go on.
It's every time you see prophecy in Greek literature or anything, the person reads it and it's just their life falls apart.
Oedipus.
Because if you, or just in anything, like if Dune.
Yeah.
Paul getting the prescience and failing to understand that there are ways that you can change things to go into a path that is not seen.
Yeah.
But because you are stuck in this mentality of you now have access to the future, there are only set things that you can.
Right.
Yeah. And I think there's the literary read for Manhattan. There's a scientific read of like, quantum mechanics, and like things get weird. You can never really be sure where electrons are, even if you're observing them at the moment. You don't know where they're going to be.
The double split.
Light is both a particle and a wave. All sorts of weird shit that happens.
And what the hell is gravity?
It's just things acting on other things, but you don't know how sometimes.
What's magnet?
How fucking magnets? How do they work?
Is it an atom? Do we have magnet particles?
Yeah, and like Manhattan is the one that I think is the most
so many questions
fun to think about, and in all of these characters, because of
he's absolutely the most.
Again, like we were talking about before we started, like I like Christopher Nolan a lot, because like the themes of his movies are the things that I like thinking about.
Dare you compare these two things?
Yeah, I mean, because shut the fuck up. because like so much of the themes of like time and relations and everything that pop memory in his movies are things that I like mulling over and find interesting in sci-fi. And more is exploring that along with determinism and all of that.
Yeah, Manhattan's super interesting. I could do an entire podcast series just on this one character, probably.
Yeah.
But we'll move on.
Yeah.
Lastly, we have Ozymandias, aka Adrian Veidt. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. Giant fucking neoliberal. He is neoliberalism.
Yeah, utilitarianism. And
utilitarianism. I mean,
just everyone in the room in 2002 when they were deciding whether to bomb Iraq, just like all of those fucking people.
Yep,
he's an Aaron Sorkin character.
Yep.
He's an Aaron Sorkin character where Aaron Sorkin gets to the end and was like, was he really that bad all along?
He's what Kissinger wants to be.
Yeah, exactly. If Kissinger was a hot dude.
Yeah, exactly. A tall, hot dude with, well, he's already got money, but
that's right.
Or at least
also very Goyish, unlike Kissinger.
Who? Adrian?
Yeah.
No, he's German.
Goyish. German.
Oh, yeah. I thought you said something. Sorry, I got stupid for a second. Cut that.
Hey, repeat that 3 times, amplify it each time.
Yes. No, absolutely. Sorry. Yeah, I got confused there. But yes, very, very, very. In fact, Adrian rhymes with Aryan. He's
it is very close.
Blue-eyed. Well, it's a soft rhyme, but blue-eyed, blonde hair. He comes from Germany. He was apparently so advanced in his school that he was just smarter than all the other kids, so they just let him graduate earlier. I think it's implied that he graduated by high school when he was 15, 16 years old, something like that, and he goes on his bullshit little soul seek journey thing throughout. He literally follows, this is how much of an Alexander the Great stan he is. He follows Alexander the Great's footsteps to the letter. So he follows that every fucking move that Alexander the Great ever made. He follows that all the way to the end, and that's when he decides to become a superhero. That's when he decides to save the world. And of course, Alexander, precursor for imperialism, precursor for fascism, precursor for pretty much every bad thing we can think of in terms of geopolitics and the military industrial complex. Fuck the Greeks. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I'm Canadian. I can say it. I can say whatever I want.
Yeah, you can. You guys are the world's greatest.
We're the sweetest people ever. Yeah, the world. So yeah, I just wanted to get kind of Ozymandias out of the way, unless anybody has anything else to say.
Also, the point of the character being that he doesn't actually know a lot about Alexander the Great. But these guys are dealing with a hyperbolic image of actually a really complicated dude. They just cherry pick the best out of all these fucking assholes. Caesar guys, Alexander guys, Napoleon guys. They all need to be shot into the sun.
Yeah, I mean, Adrian clearly has only read as you kind of touched on, the best parts of Alexander's life, not any of the what is it? History is written by the victors. There's I've been getting into the history of my ethnic people, the English, lately. Sorry, but when there are old Roman accounts of the Pict, right? And the Druids as well, and they're depicted as these barbarians who are super into human sacrifice and all this shit. And it's well, since we don't have written record from the Britons or the Picts or the Druids, we're not going to actually know if that's accurate, but it probably isn't, because that shit was written to it was propaganda.
You telling me that Caesar was not an objective observer?
Absolutely.
What?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
But he was a great man.
He was a great piece of shit.
He was a raw
giant
times.
He was a great man.
Giant turd.
If you ever are in a classics program and you're talking about the Celts, and someone will be like, but in Caesar's history of the Gaulic, you're like, shut the fuck up.
You know what?
How about
in oh shit, I don't know the name of the guy anymore, but Asterix, the Franco-Belgian comic strip Asterix. It's fucking great. Where he's like Vikings, Gauls, and shit, and are fighting and the Romans are all a bunch of it's beautiful.
Yeah, reading fucking Caesar on the Gauls and the Celts is like reading Hitler's Torah analysis. Yes. It's just like the fucking dumbest.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. So obviously Adrian's like into that interpretation of Alexander.
Yeah.
Where it's like, he's bought into the propaganda. And real fast, have you heard of this thing? It's kind of a newer term, effective altruism.
Oh, fuck those people.
Yeah, Rachel, are you familiar?
We need.
Yeah. Can I just remind me of the definition? But I have heard of it.
So it's essentially it's trying to maximize the sort of good that you can do for the world, and that also often leads into acquiring as much capital as possible with the idea of donating a great chunk of it to charity. Adrian does this. Before he goes on his stupid little trip, his parents pass away, and with his inheritance, he gives it all, the entire inheritance, charity. As we know now, charity isn't exactly a what's the word, good method by which to aid the world, because you never know exactly where that money's going to go. And more often than not, even though they're supposedly nonprofit organizations that run these things, 9 times out of 10 you get CEOs of these nonprofits who are just taking in all the fucking cash that they can get.
Yeah, they're just like tax havens, and that's where all the
and one of the main
don't people call like what's his fucking name, like Bezos, don't they like talk about him in that way? Or
talk about whom?
They talk about Bezos. They talk about J.K. Rowling is another big one.
Yeah.
And but the poster child for effective altruism, which is very funny, is this guy Sam Bankman-Fried.
Oh, fuck that guy.
Who did this whole crypto thing that ended up being a scam, and his whole shtick was, I'm gonna donate the majority of this money that I'm getting from crypto to charity, which he neither does nor even really bothers to follow up on in any substantial way, because he got arrested for fraud and got put away. But this effective altruism thing is like, it's kind of a newer sort of thing. But Adrian in the book does this by murdering 3 million people to save 3, 4, 5 billion, right? It's the concept of stepping over a homeless person who may be dying in the street, and instead of just handing them, $10 or whatever to get a meal, there's step over them to make a deposit in the bank, because that deposit is going to go to a charity that's going to give tennis shoes or whatever the fuck to children in Nicaragua or something.
Yeah.
So that's effective altruism, and that's kind of sort of his.
That tracks.
Yes. That's what he's getting at. So that's all of them. That's I just kind of wanted to go over that because I think it's a tapestry of individuality. Tells me that again, that Watchmen's main theme is that of identity itself.
Tapestry of Individuality is my new album coming out soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it going to be black metal or is it going to be klezmer?
It's going to be klezmer.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
So when the superheroes' identities are endangered in this book, they either give it wholly to the state to be used in war, or they lash out at society, or they just go and say, forget it, I'm okay. Rorschach routinely refers to his mask as his face. Dryberg, Night Owl, he's impotent without being Night Owl. What else? Summing it up, Laurie goes from the daughter of Silk Spectre to Dr. Manhattan's girlfriend to Night Owl's girlfriend to the comedienne at the end. So we got all these people, and ultimately they're all vying for some kind of control of their identity, or they're just letting it go and having somebody do it for them. But now we're going to get into the fun bit of the politics of it all, of the right and those who fail to read it properly. But I think first we should get a little bit more insight on who this Alan Moore guy and what he in part 5.
Whoa, I'm back at you. You didn't see me because this is an audio medium, but I got the wiggly arms, like one of those tube dudes. Anyway, Yeah, so that is not part four. Kind of is, in a sense. Anyway, our next part, we'll be talking about Alan Moore, as Johnny alluded to in the outro. And on behalf of everyone on the podcast, I would like to say to you, dear listeners, go take a flying fuck at the moon.